Hey, dear restless mind. Tonight, picture a room awash in the dim glow of flickering oil lamps, their flames quivering like nervous dancers in the breath of the night air. The walls are cool limestone painted with faint traces of lotus blossoms and falcons, though the years have dulled the brilliance of their colour. The air is heavy with the scent of myrrh and frankincense, mingling with the faint salt of the Nile drifting in through a narrow window. The floor beneath you is covered in woven reed mats, still prickly against your bare feet. A tray of figs and dates sits untouched on a low table, slowly drawing tiny ants as though even insects were invited to share in the luxury. In the distance, faint harp strings pluck out a melody, too languid to stir joy, too slow to bring sorrow, something in between. You are here, in the heart of ancient Thebes, where marble columns rise like frozen trees, and the rhythm of life is dictated not by your own heartbeat, but by the will of others. Your station is not chosen. You are, quite frankly, the possession of pleasure, an adornment for the whims of masters whose sandals cost more than your entire existence. You'd probably never make it through a single medieval night, between questionable hygiene, suspicious food, and the vague risk of being sold for 2 goats. But don't worry, I'll guide you safely through. So before we go any further, if this quiet company helps, you can gently tap like and subscribe, but only if it feels right to your heart. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Maybe lying awake in New York or drifting in a quiet room in London. Drop your time and place below so none of us feel alone tonight. Now, dim the lights, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin tonight's slow, strange journey, together, here on Timeless Sleep. The first glimpse of your daily life is not dramatic nor glamorous in the way later poets might imagine. Instead, it begins with routines as structured as the rising of Ra himself. Before dawn, while others still dream, you are shaken awake by a fellow servant. The chamber is cold, the rush mat stiff beneath you, and your first thought is not of freedom, nor of rebellion, but of whether there will be warm bread left in the kitchens by the time you're dismissed from preparation. Survival, after all, is always your first master. They dress you not in heavy linen reserved for nobles, but in gauzy garments that cling and reveal, fabric as thin as breath, dyed with whatever hues your master fancies that week. Sometimes you're draped in lapis blue, the colour of eternity, other times in pale ochre, matching the sands that you'll never be free to walk on alone. The jewels are not yours. They slip them over your wrists, neck and ankles, then slip them off again when the evening ends. A reminder that you are at best a mannequin animated for their amusement. Still, the chambers in which you move dazzle the eyes. Golden braziers, ivory combs, mirrors polished to an almost painful shine. Luxuries meant to proclaim your master's wealth, even if you are the stage upon which that wealth parades. You learn quickly that beauty here is not kindness, it is currency, and you are the coin passed from one hand to another. As you shuffle quietly through these corridors, you catch glimpses of the wider house. Murals of gods hunting crocodiles, wide courtyards planted with date palms, pools of water shimmering under lotus blooms. Children run barefoot, laughing, their games oblivious to the servants who bow their heads and vanish like shadows. You envy them, though you know their fates may not be kinder when age weighs down their play. By mid-morning, you are already rehearsed in the art of stillness. Masters prefer you to be present yet invisible, until the moment they require your presence, when you must transform into delight embodied. It's a paradox worthy of philosophers. Be noticed without ever drawing attention, smile without ever desiring, exist without leaving a mark. If you ever succeed in that balance, you're more flexible than any acrobat the Nile has produced. Meals, when they come, are not feasts of plenty, but quiet offerings left for servants. Bread with seeds, perhaps a smear of honey, onions sharp enough to sting your tongue. Wine is reserved for nobles, though on rare occasions the dregs are shared. You learn to sip sparingly. Nothing good comes from a pleasure slave drunk in the presence of men who treat sobriety like a leash. By afternoon, the palace stirs. Nobles arrive in chariots, their wheels rattling like teeth in the dry dust. Priests mutter incantations under their breath, carrying papyri that smell of oil and ink. Couriers bring gossip of wars in distant Nubia or treaties carved into stone. You stand at the edge of this whirlwind, never asked for an opinion, yet absorbing every whispered secret like a sponge. Ironically, You know more of Egypt's politics than many scribes, though you could never speak it aloud. Knowledge in your position is like handling fire. You warm your hands in secret but drop it publicly in your ash. Evenings are when your true role comes alive. The chamber fills with the rich, the powerful and the weary. They want distraction, amusement, softness against the harshness of governing kingdoms. Musicians tune their lyres, dancers loosen their limbs, servants bustle with trays of figs, roasted fowl and wine that taste like sun trapped in a jar. You're arranged among them like an ornament, placed, posed and expected to glow. But glowing is its own skill. You learn to laugh on cue, to tilt your head just enough to make them feel clever, to offer sympathy without caring, to sparkle like a mirror reflecting their own grandeur. It is, in essence, a performance. And if you've ever smiled at a boss's bad joke in modern times, congratulations, you'd fit right in here. And, yet, beneath the laughter, there are layers of danger. Nobles see you as both treasure and toy, a contradiction as sharp as obsidian. A wrong word, a grimace mistaken for defiance, a glance too long. These are not small mistakes. They can alter the course of your night, your week, perhaps your entire fate. Survival is a constant dance and the music never stops. Every now and then, however, you glimpse humanity through the cracks. A noble woman, bored of her husband's boasts, asks you about the scent of lotus perfume. A scribe, drunk beyond measure, admits he's terrified his writings will be forgotten. These moments are fleeting, but they remind you that even gilded thrones creak under the same weight of fear and longing that you feel. You may be a slave, but you're not alone in your quiet desperation. Late into the night, as the last lamp sputters and dies, you retreat to your corner. Jewellery stripped away, garments tossed aside, you curl once more onto a reed mat that scratches your skin. The figs are long gone, the harp silent, the air heavy with smoke. You let out a sigh, somewhere between relief and exhaustion. And for a moment, in the hush between the fading night and the rising sun, you let yourself imagine, what if this were truly your life? What if every dawn began with the weight of bracelets that were not gifts, every dusk ended with laughter that was not yours? The irony is, you'd survive. You already know how to nod at the right moment, how to polish your silence into a kind of shield, how to let your thoughts escape into corners no one else can see. Survival, after all, is humanity's oldest craft. If the pyramids still stand after thousands of years, maybe the same stubborn endurance rests in you. You may not leave a monument, but you leave a trace, if only in the whispered gossip of nobles who cannot remember your name but recall your presence. And so your first glimpse of life as a pleasure slave is not a tale of grandeur nor tragedy, but of endurance, ornamentation, and quiet rebellion carved into the spaces between words. Tomorrow will bring oils and perfumes, rituals and banquets, whispers and chains. But tonight, here in the dim light of flickering lamps, you survive. And in surviving, you outlast. The ascent reaches you before the sun does. Not the fresh breath of morning air drifting in from the Nile, but the cloying heaviness of oil warmed on a brazier. Sesame oil thick as honey, mixed with cardamom and cinnamon, waiting in shallow bronze bowls. That is your first task of the day, transformation, and transformation always begins with preparation. You are not dressed as yourself, you are dressed as a vision designed for others, and that vision requires the patient labour of servants who know exactly how to turn a human into ornament. You sit cross-legged on a reed mat while another slave rubs warmed oil across your skin. Her hands are brisk, efficient, like someone buffing a statue rather than caressing flesh. Oil is both blessing and curse. It protects your skin from the pitiless desert air, but it also leaves you gleaming like a display vase under lamplight. Gleam is the point, of course. Gleam means wealth. Gleam means health. Gleam means your master can stand back at a banquet and smirk. Yes, even my servants look like they were sculpted from sunlight. Next comes the cosmetics. The jars clink softly as lids are lifted. Powdered malachite for your eyes, crushed carmine beetle for your lips, ground ochre for your cheeks. You close your eyes while a thin reed applicator paints lines sharp enough to slice through a conversation. Black coal traces the edges, winging outward like falcon feathers. It is meant to protect you from the glare of the sun, they say, but in practice it protects you from being ignored. No guest at a feast can miss eyes rimmed like the horizon at dusk. You're told to hold still, though the coal stings when it seeps into the corner of your eye. you hold still anyway. Holding still is survival disguised as obedience. Perfume follows. Little alabaster jars, stoppered with beeswax, each filled with thick resinous concoctions, myrrh, frankincense, lotus, even the rare imported cinnamon from far beyond the Red Sea. They melt a cone of perfumed wax onto your wig so it will drip slowly all evening, releasing fragrance with every movement of your head. The irony is rich. You may smell like paradise, but you cannot choose the scent. Someone else's nose decides what aura you exude. If they favour you, you smell like lilies. If not, you smell faintly of goat. Your wig is combed until your scalp aches. Black human hair woven with strands of wool to thicken it, set with ornaments that clatter faintly when you tilt your head. Hair is important. Short, shaved scalps mark labourers. Long, gleaming wigs mark pleasure. You could never mistake your category even in a crowded street, and should the wig slip, gods forbid. That would be the sort of embarrassment a noble might joke about for months, the way we today might retell the story of tripping at a wedding. Except here, the joke would end with someone selling you to harsher masters just to erase the memory. They smooth your limbs with henna, staining nails a deep reddish brown. It hides the calluses and cracks that come from work, pretending your hands never touched grain sacks or washed stone floors. Presentation is everything. If history had invented Photoshop already, you'd have been filtered 1,000 times before stepping into the banquet hall. By the time they finish, you're exhausted. You haven't even started the day's duties, yet you feel as though you've run across half the desert. The transformation steals hours from your life, and each hour is devoted not to what you are, but to what they want you to be. You're painted, perfumed, sculpted, dressed in linen so sheer it might as well be a rumour. Gold bangles weigh your wrists. Ankle cuffs chime with each step a sound that says, here comes decoration. Here comes delight. You are less a person than a procession. Of course, the servants preparing you have their own thoughts. The girl painting your lips mutters under her breath about her sick brother. The one fastening your girdle sighs that she wishes she'd been assigned to the kitchens instead. You all share these murmurs in half whispers, the kind of solidarity invisible to masters. Sometimes those whispers are the only parts of you that still belong to you. By midday, when you're finally ready, you've become a walking advertisement. Every drop of oil, every line of coal, every stitch of linen is designed not for your comfort, but to magnify your master's prestige. Guests will see you and say, "Ah, even his slaves are adorned like queens." No one will ask if you've eaten, though the pit in your stomach answers for itself. The ritual repeats endlessly, a carousel of oil, paint, linen and jewellery. You could close your eyes and still know the order of each step. Oil first, then coal, then perfume, then wig, then linen, then gold. It's as predictable as sunrise. And yet, predictability has its own power. The cycle becomes a shield. As long as you move through it correctly, as long as you gleam when commanded to gleam, you are safe. Safe in the precarious way a glass goblet is safe while balanced on the edge of a table. There are moments of absurdity that sneak through the solemnity. Once, the perfume cone slid sideways on your wig and melted down your cheek, making you smell like a candlestick. Another time, the servant applying henna sneezed and left a streak across your palm that made you look as though you'd been gnawing pomegranates like a feral animal. Masters didn't laugh at those mistakes, of course, but you and the other slaves did, later in private, with muffled giggles that tasted like rebellion. Cosmetics in Egypt were not merely for beauty, they were tied to health and religion. Kohl was believed to ward off eye infections and even to invoke the protection of Horus. So when they painted your eyes, it wasn't only to make you pleasing, it was also to mark you as under divine gaze. Imagine that. Divine protection in the form of raccoon eyeliner. The gods, it seems, were both merciful and fashion-forward. Oils carried similar weight. They were antiseptic, preserving skin against the relentless sun. They also served as offerings to gods in temples. The line between sacred and profane blurred every time oil slicked your shoulders. You might be presented to a noble 1 hour and imagined as an offering to Hathor the next. The duality was dizzying, but you learned quickly that in Egypt, to be beautiful was to be useful, and to be useful was to be safe. Perfume, too, told its own story. Some scents were believed to arouse desire, others to calm tempers, others still to protect against evil spirits. You never knew which spell you were carrying into the evening until it was melted onto your wig. One night you might smell of lotus, making you joyful. Another night you might smell of frankincense, guarding against malice. You became a walking incense stick, warding off spirits by accident. Not exactly the superpower you'd ask for, but better than nothing. As you rise from the reed mat, the weight of transformation pressing down on your shoulders, you catch your reflection in a polished bronze mirror. For a heartbeat, you don't recognize yourself. The painted face staring back is both familiar and alien. Your own eyes, but sharper, your own mouth, but redder, your own skin, but brighter. You wonder where you went, buried under layers of pigment and perfume. The mirror offers no answer. It only reflects the person they want you to be. And yet, somewhere beneath the oils and cosmetics, you remain. Your heartbeat is yours. Your breath is yours. The small private jokes you share with the other slaves, those belong to you. In a world where everything else is painted over, those invisible fragments are the truest cosmetics you wear. Laughter, defiance, memory. No one can rub those away, no matter how much oil they pour. When you finally step into the hall, gleaming and fragrant, you know what role you will play. Guests will marvel at the spectacle. Masters will preen. You will smile, nod, pour wine, dance if required, laugh on cue, and pretend you are the very embodiment of effortless grace. And in a sense you are. It takes immense effort to look effortless. That is the secret of all decoration, ancient or modern. And so the ritual of oils and cosmetics, endless and exhausting, becomes the stage on which your life is performed. Each drop of oil, each streak of coal, each cone of perfume is both mask and truth, cage and shield. You are made beautiful not for yourself but for survival, and in surviving you carry on, painted, perfumed and enduring. The banquet begins long before the guests arrive. Servants hurry across the courtyard like ants disturbed from their nest, balancing trays of pomegranates, roasted goose, and loaves of bread shaped like little suns. Musicians lean against cool limestone walls, tuning their harps and lyres with fingers stained by resin and sweat. The air is a swirl of smells, charred meat, spilled wine, lotus perfume, incense rising in lazy coils. By the time the first noble steps through the archway, everything is already pulsing with anticipation, like the hush before a storm. You're not a guest, of course. You're an ornament, part of the architecture of the evening, positioned carefully, never randomly. Your master is particular about placement, as though you are another gilded cup or painted vase. Tonight you sit at the edge of a cushioned couch, linen draped so sheer it feels more like mist than cloth. Gold bangles clink faintly as you shift, announcing your presence the way bells warn of, cattle moving. It is not so much comfort as choreography. Banquets in Egypt are spectacles of wealth and power. Guests recline on couches, eating with their fingers, while slaves circulate to keep cups brimming and plates replenished. The wine flows as though the Nile itself has been bottled, diluted with water to keep everyone upright at least until dessert. Roasted oxen, bowls of lentils, figs stuffed with honey, fish spiced with coriander. Abundance is part of the performance. Scarcity belongs outside the palace walls in villages where bread is stretched with sawdust. In here, food is theatre, and you are one of the actors. Your role is subtle, but essential. You're to laugh at the appropriate moments, to tilt your head so that gold catches the light, to lean in close enough that nobles forget the day's arguments over taxes and fields. Entertainment is not only music or dance, it is the reassurance that pleasure itself is alive and available, embodied in you. The musicians begin softly, strings plucked like raindrops against stone. Conversation is cautious at first. Nobles trade observations about the flooding of the Nile, about harvests and temple dedications. But as wine loosens tongues, the talk grows louder, less guarded. Politics slips in like a thief at the door. Someone mutters about a priest growing too powerful, another about Pharaoh's latest decree. You sit silently, eyes lowered, but your ears are open. Knowledge is the only luxury you can steal, and tonight the banquet overflows with it. One noble complains that temple taxes leave his estate starving, though the gold thread in his tunic suggests otherwise. Another brags that his daughter has been betrothed to a general, sealing an alliance more binding than papyrus contracts. These men believe you are invisible, like the reed mats under their feet. They forget that invisibility is the perfect cover for memory. You store every word, every whisper, though you will never speak them aloud. Knowledge here is both power and poison. It must be sipped carefully like undiluted wine. As the evening deepens, the performances begin. Dancers whirl, their limbs gleaming with oil, anklets jingling with every step. Acrobats bend themselves into shapes that look more punishment than entertainment. The crowd cheers, laughter swelling like surf against stone. You are asked to rise, to join the spectacle, not for skill, but for presence. You sway gently to the harp, your bangles chiming, your perfume cone releasing fresh sweetness as it melts. You're not meant to outshine the dancers. You are meant to be part of the atmosphere, as much decoration as the painted lotus columns. And yet, being decoration is exhausting. You smile until your jaw aches, laugh until your ribs tighten. You nod at jokes that barely rise above grunts. A noble leans too close, his breath sour with wine, and you keep your expression smooth though you want to recoil. Another places grapes in your hand, as though feeding a bird, and you must pretend the gesture is delightful, not degrading. Performance is survival, and survival demands every ounce of composure. There is humour too, though often unintentional. A drunken scribe spills wine down his tunic and insists it is an omen from the gods. A noblewoman snorts so loudly at a joke that even the musicians falter. A platter of roasted quail tips over, scattering birds like fallen soldiers across the floor. You smile, eyes lowered, but inside you laugh. Laughter is your one safe rebellion, though you release it silently, a joke told only to yourself. Occasionally a guest notices you not as decoration but as human. A priest once asked if you believed the gods listened to prayers from slaves. A general, drunk and sentimental, confessed he feared death more than defeat. These scraps of honesty are rare, but they lodge in your mind like pebbles in a shoe. They remind you that even those who own you are haunted, fragile, clumsy in their grandeur. Perhaps that is the cruelest joke of all. The masters are just as trapped in their roles as you are. The banquet stretches late into the night. Servants refill cups until the wine tastes more like water, clear and thin. Dancers grow weary, their movements less sharp, but no one notices. Guests argue louder, voices overlapping, until the room is a hive of buzzing bees. Your master beams, pleased at the display of wealth, at the illusion of harmony. You remain on your couch, perfume dripping, smile steady, body aching. And then comes the moment you dread. The hush before someone decides to make you part of the entertainment. It might be a command to sing, though your voice is not trained. It might be a request to pour wine directly into a guest's mouth like a trained pet. It might be something more humiliating, masked as amusement. Tonight it is a demand that you dance again, though your feet throb and your wig has begun to itch from melted wax. You rise anyway. Refusal is not an option. The harp plucks a faster rhythm, drums beat softly, and you sway as instructed. You know the movements well. Step, turn, tilt, extend. Your body is a script, memorized and rehearsed. The nobles cheer, clapping in time, though none of them notice the pain in your ankles, the sweat on your brow. To them, you are a painting that has learned to move. To you, you are endurance disguised as grace. At last, the night wanes. Guests drift away, carried in litters, their laughter echoing in the courtyards. The musicians pack their instruments, yawning. The smell of smoke and spilled wine clings to the air. You are dismissed to your corner, stripped of jewellery, perfumed wig lifted from your head like a helmet removed after battle. Your skin itches from oil, your eyes sting from coal, your body aches from hours of stillness and motion combined. You collapse onto your reed mat, exhausted, the silence of the chamber loud after so much noise. Yet even as you close, your eyes, fragments of the banquet, linger. A noble's careless whisper about the pharaoh's failing health, a priest's muttered complaint about temple politics, a general's laughter that sounded more like fear. These scraps weave together in your memory, a tapestry of secrets you were never meant to hold. You smile faintly in the dark. They think you are invisible, but you see everything. The banquet is over. The oil has cooled, the wine is gone, the laughter has faded. Tomorrow it will all begin again. Another couch, another performance, another night of gleam and laughter, and you will survive it, as you always do, painted, perfumed, enduring. The nights of banquets leave echoes in the morning, not only in your aching muscles, but in the whispers that drift like smoke through the palace corridors. By dawn, most nobles sleep off their indulgence, but scribes are already at work. Priests murmur incantations in hidden courtyards, and messengers carry clay tablets tucked under their arms. You, however, slip into a different role, the silent shadow lingering at the edge of conversations, the ornament no one notices until it is too late. Life as a pleasure slave is not only oils and banquets, it is also the strange privilege of hearing everything you should never know. You are invisible enough that nobles forget you are human, yet visible enough that they never send you away. This paradox makes you the perfect audience for secrets. Whispers find you in quiet corridors, in candlelit chambers, in moments when laughter falters and masks slip. One night, you recline near the cushions of a high priest, your head bowed, eyes lowered, while his colleagues argue over temple revenues. The incense burns so thick you could choke, but it does not drown out their words. The pharaoh demands more offerings, one hisses, but our granaries are already stretched thin. Another retorts, then tell him the gods have spoken otherwise. He won't dare to contradict the divine. Their voices rise, a battle fought not with spears but with whispers, each man convinced the gods are conveniently on his side. You say nothing, of course, but you remember. At another gathering, a scribe drunk on honey wine mutters about forging names on a papyrus contract. No one checks the seals, he chuckles. I could give myself an estate tomorrow. His companions laugh nervously, unaware you are sitting a mere arm's length away, your ears sharper than papyrus reeds. That memory, too, you store. Knowledge becomes your hidden hoard, more precious than gold. You cannot wear it, cannot spend it, cannot show it, but it is there, a private treasure. You know which noble's son gambles away his inheritance on dice games, which priest secretly worships a forbidden deity, which general fears his men more than his enemies. You know which marriages are loveless, which alliances are fragile, which debts are crippling. It is like being the wall of the palace itself, always present, always absorbing, never speaking. Of course, the danger of knowing is immense. Should anyone suspect your memory is more than decoration, you could be silenced swiftly, and not with kindness. So you perfect the art of expressionless listening. Eyes lowered, lips curved faintly, body poised just so. You are the statue in the corner, the vase on the shelf, the candle whose flame flickers without protest. And yet, behind that stillness, your mind races. There are absurdities, too, in the things you overhear. A noble once spent an hour insisting that his pet baboon could interpret dreams better than any priest. Another bragged that his geese laid golden eggs until one unfortunate bird was brought to a banquet, producing only the usual unimpressive white shell. Guests laughed so loudly the harpist had to pause. You smiled faintly, though you wondered if the goose deserved a raise for managing comedy under pressure. Then there are moments that are almost too human. A noble woman weeping softly, confessing to her confidant that she fears her beauty fading. A scribe whispering that he longs to run away to Nubia, free of contracts and ink stains. These murmurs remind you that beneath linen and gold, all of them carry the same fragile fears. They are trapped too, trapped by expectation, by ambition, by the weight of names carved into stone. You may wear chains, but theirs are invisible and sometimes heavier. The hieroglyphs carved on palace walls tell glorious tales of pharaohs smiting enemies, of gods blessing the harvest, of eternal order preserved by divine will. But the whispered hieroglyphs, the ones spoken in wine-stained voices breathed in shadows, tell a different story. They speak of shortages, betrayals, secret pacts, quiet rebellions. You alone hear them, and in hearing them you glimpse the cracks in the stone. One evening, as you kneel by a couch pouring wine into alabaster cups, two generals mutter about troop movements. We march tomorrow, one says, though the men are weary. If the Nubians strike first, we're finished, the other snorts. Then let Pharaoh call on his gods. I'll call on my legs and run. Their laughter is harsh, edged with fear. No official scribe will ever record this conversation. Yet you hold it in your memory, as clearly as the taste of the figs you weren't allowed to eat. Sometimes, the knowledge is more dangerous than amusing. You hear of plots to poison rivals, of alliances sealed not by contracts, but by shared mistresses. You hear names whispered in curses, promises of revenge spoken under breath. Each secret feels like a spark dropped into dry reeds, harmless alone, but catastrophic if it spreads. And you, unwilling custodian, carry those sparks in silence. Do you ever consider using what you know, perhaps whispering into the right ear, tipping the balance of power? The thought is tempting, like reaching for fruit hanging just beyond your grasp. But temptation is perilous. In this world, slaves are not players, they are pieces, and pieces do not move themselves. To speak what you know would be to sign your own end. So you keep silent, smiling faintly, pretending the only thoughts in your head are about perfume and laughter. Yet silence does not mean nothingness. It means survival. And survival means you become sharper, more observant, more attuned to the undercurrents others ignore. If the nobles are actors in a grand play, then you are the audience who sees the strings behind the curtain. And though no one applauds you, your memory is its own applause. A quiet acknowledgement that you have endured another night of secrets without being consumed by them. Sometimes, late at night, you replay the whispers in your mind. They echo like chants in a temple, layered, overlapping, contradictory. You imagine them as invisible hieroglyphs carved into your own bones, stories no one will ever read. Perhaps one day they will fade, washed away like inscriptions eroded by sandstorms. Or perhaps they will remain, your private chronicle, proof that you existed not only as ornament but as witness. There is humour even in that thought. Imagine the gods weighing your heart in the afterlife, only to discover it stuffed with gossip about generals, priests, and drunken nobles. What is this, Anubis might ask, pouring through your soul? Oh, just a few centuries of palace drama, you'd reply. Feel free to archive it under miscellaneous. In the meantime, you carry on. Another banquet, another feast, another night of whispered hieroglyphs etched into your memory. You are painted, perfumed, and silent, but your silence is not empty. It is filled with secrets, heavy as stone, fragile as papyrus. And so, while nobles boast and priests chant and generals argue, you remain the quiet listener at the edge of it all. Not by choice, not by freedom, but by endurance. And in enduring you become something no one intended. The keeper of truths too fragile for stone, too dangerous for ink, too fleeting for memory. Except yours. The temple is not supposed to feel like the palace, yet to you the difference is thinner than papyrus. You walk barefoot across cool stone floors, the echo of your steps swallowed by incense thicker than desert fog. Columns rise around you, carved with gods in eternal poses, Hathor smiling faintly, Horus glaring like he just lost at dice, Osiris seated as though eternity were a particularly stiff chair. Here, the air is meant to be sacred, heavy with hymns and prayers, but for you, it smells the same as the banquet hall. Burned frankincense, honey wine, and the faint nervous sweat of men making promises they don't intend to keep. You are not here as a worshipper, you are here as part of the offering. Temples blur the line between devotion to gods and devotion to the whims of priests, and your life sits right at that blurry seam. Priest sprinkles holy water across the altar, chanting in a rhythm older than the pyramids, and you kneel beside a basin of oil, gleaming and perfumed. To the crowd, it looks as though you belong to Hathor, goddess of love, beauty, and music. In truth, you belong to whoever claimed your body last night and will claim it again tomorrow. It is a strange paradox. You're draped in sacred linen, anklets chiming like temple bells, eyes rimmed with kohl meant to invoke divine protection. You're displayed not only as entertainment but as proof of divine favour. See, the priest's eyes say, how blessed our temple is. Even our servants glow like the dawn. Never mind that you glow because you were oiled like a roast goose an hour ago. Never mind that your knees ache from kneeling, or that your stomach growls because you were told fasting was more fitting for divine service. Worshippers shuffle past, offering baskets of figs, jars of honey, and geese that squawk indignantly before they are led to their fate. They glance at you, sometimes with reverence, sometimes with envy, sometimes with the kind of curiosity usually reserved for exotic pets. One old woman whispers, "Hathor bless this child," pressing a date into your palm as though you are both relic and beggar. You smile faintly, though you're not sure if you should thank her or apologize for the role you've been forced into. The priest treats you with calculated detachment. To them, you are neither fully sacred nor fully profane, but an instrument. They adjust your posture, correct your gestures, direct your gaze. You are told to sing softly during the hymns, your voice blending with sistrums and harps. You're told to pour wine at the altar, the stream catching the light like liquid amber. You're told to stand very still as the sacred procession moves, a breathing statue useful precisely because you do not move on your own. And yet, behind the rituals, you hear the same whispers as in the palace. Priests arguing quietly about donations, scribes grumbling about late payments, temple guards joking crudely about who dropped a goose in the courtyard. The gods, you realise, must have a wicked sense of humour. Imagine sitting on a golden throne for eternity, only to listen to your worshippers complain about accounting errors. If Horus has ears, he must spend half his day muttering, "Not this again." The role of a temple servant carries a strange power. Some villagers look at you as though you are touched by divinity. A farmer bows low, thanking you as though your smile could ensure rain. Children stare, wide-eyed, whispering that you must be Hathor's daughter. If only they knew that last night you were pouring wine for a noble who compared you to his prize donkey. Beautiful, but stubborn. The illusion is cruel, but illusions are Egypt's specialty. Temples thrive on them, and so do palaces. There are darker sides too. Some priests use sacred, service as an excuse for indulgence. The line between ritual and exploitation is as thin as your linen. One priest insists that Hathor herself demands certain embraces as offerings. Another justifies his wandering hands with muttered prayers. You learn to smile, to nod, to become vessel and mask, all while tucking away the absurdity for later laughter. If the gods truly watch, they must have the patience of sandstone not to strike lightning every other minute. The temple is also where you learn the greatest irony of your life. The gods, like nobles, demand constant entertainment. They are fed, perfumed, sung to, flattered. Statues are anointed with the same oil smeared on your skin. Incense rises like bribes offered to the sky. And always, there you are. Half offering, half distraction, a reminder that beauty is currency even in the presence of eternity. If eternity itself needs a good show to stay content, then truly everyone is in the same business. There are moments when the sacred seeps through despite the absurdity. During a festival, the temple overflows with music, dancers swirling like petals in the wind, chants rolling like waves against stone. You stand at the altar, hands raised, and for a moment you almost believe the goddess sees you. The incense burns your eyes, the sistrums rattle like rainfall, and you feel the strange hum of belief ripple through the crowd. It is not your belief. It has long since been worn down, but theirs, and it is powerful enough to touch you. For a heartbeat, you wonder if perhaps the gods do notice slaves too, if only in the quiet spaces between chants. But the feeling passes quickly, replaced by the practical. A jar spills, a goose escapes, a priest barks orders. The divine gives way to the ridiculous, as it always does. You bite back laughter as you help chase the goose, its wings flapping like a furious spirit refusing sacrifice. The crowd gasps, priests panic, and you can't help but think, if the gods wanted entertainment, this is far more amusing than any hymn. By nightfall, the temple quiets. Offerings are cleared, incense burned down to ash, sacred statues draped for rest. You return to your chamber, skin still sticky with oil, hair smelling of smoke and lotus. You have been told all day that you were serving the gods, but you know the truth. You served men, as always. And yet you cling to the faint possibility that somewhere in the incense haze, Hathor caught your eye and thought, "Poor child." At least you endure the sacred offerings blur into the same cycle as banquets. Oil, perfume, display, silence. But the temple adds a new weight, a performance not only for nobles but for eternity itself. And in that performance, you are both less and more than yourself. Less because you're reduced to symbol, more because symbols are powerful even when they cannot speak. You close your eyes on your reed mat, the day's chant still echoing faintly. You imagine the gods, leaning down, their statues whispering among themselves. That one. She sees everything. You almost laugh at the thought. If the gods are gossiping about you, then perhaps you are finally in the right company. The bracelets shine so brightly in the lamplight that anyone from the outside might mistake them for symbols of privilege. Thick bands of gold etched with lotus flowers, anklets that chime with every movement, necklaces strung with beads the colour of lapis and turquoise. They glitter when you enter a hall, catching the eye before your face does. To the nobles, this shimmer says, "Look how generous we are. Look how even our slaves are adorned like royalty." But to you, each piece is another reminder that beauty can be a cage, one that sparkles just enough to distract everyone from the lock. When they drape those bangles over your wrists, they do not ask if the metal pinches. When they fasten anklets heavy enough to drag at your step, they do not wonder whether your skin bruises. The jewellery is not meant for you at all. It is meant for them, a mirror of wealth that glints whenever you move. You are the walking display case, the mannequin that breathes. If you were to vanish tomorrow, they would simply place those jewels on another body and carry on. Still, the illusion is powerful. Visitors gasp at the sight of you, their eyes drawn first to the glimmering adornments, then to the painted eyes and perfumed hair. You hear them whisper to one another. Even the slaves here are dressed finer than nobles elsewhere. That is the point, of course. A master's reputation is measured not only in estates and cattle, but in how extravagant his slaves appear. You are wealth, walking. You are status, embodied. And yet you are none of these things, because not a single bead belongs to you. Sometimes you catch your reflection in a polished bronze mirror and almost believe the illusion. Draped in linen, dripping with gold, face painted into perfection, you look untouchable, almost divine. But then you lower your gaze, see the bruises where bangles press too hard, feel the ache in your back from hours of stillness, and the illusion collapses. The jewellery is not a gift. It is a leash disguised as decoration. A leash does not become freedom just because it shines. It is not only jewellery. The very rooms you inhabit are cages disguised as paradise. High-ceiling chambers lined with painted walls, courtyards with pools filled with lotus, gardens perfumed with herbs. Visitors marvel at them, exclaiming how lucky servants here must be. And yes, the rooms are beautiful. The walls gleam with bright ochre and lapis. The floors are polished smooth. The pools shimmer under sunlight. But beauty does not soften captivity. You can admire the reflection of the moon in a pool, but you cannot drink from it. Your quarters are close enough to hear the music of feasts, but far enough to remind you you're not part of them. You sleep on reed mats, scratchy, against skin oiled smooth only hours before. The contrast is laughable. In the evening you're a vision of luxury. In the morning you're just another body huddled against the cold stone floor. If irony were edible, you'd never go hungry. There are visitors who believe the illusion. Foreign merchants, ambassadors from Nubia or Crete, gape at the spectacle of servants adorned like royalty. They return home telling tales of Egyptian generosity, never realizing the bangles are borrowed, the smiles rehearsed, the luxury a performance. If only they could see the moment after the banquet, when the jewellery is stripped away and tossed into chests, when wigs are yanked off scalps, when perfume cones slide half-melted onto the floor. They would see not paradise but theatre, and the theatre's actors collapsing in exhaustion. There is a cruel brilliance in the system. By surrounding you with luxury, they convince outsiders, and sometimes even you, that your life is enviable. At least you live among gold, someone once muttered when you complained in hushed tones. As though gold were food, as though turquoise beads could soothe aching joints, as though anklets could replace freedom. It is the oldest trick in power. Gild the cage and call it kindness. And yet, even cages have cracks. You learn to find small freedoms in the margins. When the jewellery is heavy, you clink it deliberately louder, making nobles glance at one another as though the room itself were laughing at them. When a necklace catches your hair, you pretend it was an accident that you tugged too hard, breaking the string so beads scatter across the floor. Nobles stoop to gather them, muttering curses, while you smile faintly, invisible once again. There are moments when the absurdity almost tips into comedy. Once, a noble's wife insisted her dog be adorned with the same jewellery as you, claiming it would amuse the guests. They slipped anklets onto the poor animal, who immediately shook them off and bolted through the hall, trailing gold and chaos. The guests laughed until tears rolled down their cheeks. You laughed silently too, though not for the same reason. The dog, at least, had the sense to run. Luxury also carries danger. Jewellery makes you a target not only of admiration but of envy. Other slaves glare when you pass, muttering that you are favoured, that you think yourself above them. You do not, but the gold speaks louder than your silence. Once, a kitchen slave spat into your food, muttering that your anklets jingled too loudly while she toiled over fires. You understood her bitterness, though you ate the bread anyway, because hunger does not care about envy. Sometimes, in darker hours, you imagine what it would be like to own even one of the jewels, to slip a single ring into your palm and keep it, hidden away as proof that something belonged to you. But you know better. Jewellery is counted, guarded, locked away each night. Any missing piece would condemn you. The punishment would not be subtle. The jewellery that once gleamed on your skin would be melted into shackles instead. Gold does not change its nature. In the end, it always binds. And yet, the illusion of luxury does serve a purpose beyond your master's pride. It is armour of a sort. When nobles see you gleaming, they treat you as part of the spectacle, less likely to strike or scorn. You are too valuable to bruise visibly, too adorned to be dismissed entirely. The jewellery that weighs you down also shields you, however slightly, from harsher blows. It is not freedom, but it is survival, and survival, as always, is the only currency you truly possess. At night, when the jewellery is stripped away and your skin breathes again, you lie on your mat and remember the weight. You close your eyes and still feel the bangles pressing, the anklets tugging, the necklace choking slightly at your throat. The absence of gold feels stranger than its presence, like missing a burden you never wanted. You realise then that the gilded cage has seeped into your bones. Even when the jewellery is gone, its memory lingers. You laugh softly at the thought. If ghosts exist, you will not be haunted by ancestors or gods. You will be haunted by bracelets that jingle in the dark, by necklaces that tighten when you breathe, by anklets that drag your steps even when your feet are bare. The ghosts of gold are heavier than chains of iron, and yet tomorrow you will wear them again. You will gleam in the lamplight, smile faintly, and let visitors marvel. They will see luxury. You will feel captivity. They will praise your master's generosity. You will remember your mat of reeds. They will whisper that even slaves live like kings in Egypt. You will know the truth, that luxury is only another mask for chains. So you endure, painted and perfumed, adorned and constrained, gleaming and unseen. The jewellery shines, the anklets chime, the bracelets glint, and the cage glitters so brightly that no one notices it is still a cage. The Nile has always been Egypt's heartbeat, but now that heartbeat falters beneath the heavy tread of foreign boots. Word drifts first in whispers, merchants muttering that Roman ships have been seen on the horizon, soldiers boasting that Caesar's men are marching further south. Then suddenly the whispers are reality. Rome is here. Rome is everywhere. The eagle standard rises where once only the falcon of Horus presided. For you, this means chains that already pinched are now tightened, reshaped into a new pattern. You do not see the great battles. You do not watch Antony and Cleopatra spar with charm and strategy. What you see is simpler, stranger, and more personal. One morning, the palace is filled with voices speaking not Egyptian but Latin. The cadence is harsher, the words tumbling like rocks down a hill. You understand almost nothing, but you do not need to. Tone speaks louder than translation. Rome has arrived, and Rome does not ask politely. Your master, once proud of his Egyptian lineage, suddenly wears Roman-style tunics. He learns to say salve instead of good morning, and sprinkles Latin words into his speech like a child scattering seeds he does not know how to water. Guests who once toasted the pharaoh now raise cups to emperors across the sea. Even the food shifts. Garum, a pungent fish sauce, appears on platters beside honeyed figs, and no one dares wrinkle their nose. Egypt bends, not with grace but with necessity. For you, the shift is even sharper. One evening you are painted with kohl and draped in sheer linen, symbols of Egyptian luxury. The next, you're fitted with a Roman stola, its folds heavy and constricting, its colours chosen not for your master's fancy, but for the approval of Roman officials. You shuffle awkwardly in this foreign costume, feeling as though your body has been turned into parchment for someone else's proclamation. The fabric is thicker, the lines straighter, the elegance colder. Linen whispered, wool declares. Roman masters are different, and yet not different at all. They still see you as ornament, as entertainment, as a breathing trophy. But where Egyptians wrap their commands in incense and ritual, Romans speak bluntly, their voices like hammer blows. Stand there. Sing louder. Smile. There is no pretense of sacred service, no illusion that your beauty pleases the gods. With Rome, pleasure is military, organised, efficient, scheduled like troop movements. Even desire marches in formation. You're displayed at feasts in new ways. Egyptian banquets were languid affairs, stretched like lazy afternoons, full of music and perfume. Roman feasts are structured spectacles, courses brought in strict order, slaves parading dishes as though advancing in ranks. You kneel beside couches where senators recline, their purple-striped tunics glowing in lamplight, their sandals tracking dust from lands you have never seen. They speak not of Nile floods and temple offerings, but of conquests in Gaul, uprisings in Judea, tributes from Africa. Egypt is no longer the centre. It is a jewel in Rome's crown, and you are one more stone set into its band. At first, the Romans treat you like a novelty. They laugh at your coal-lined eyes, marvel at the scent of lotus still clinging to your skin. Exotic, they murmur, as though you are a fruit plucked from a tree they have just discovered. They compare you to Cleopatra, though they have never seen her, and chuckle at their own wit. You smile faintly, though the word exotic burns worse than any perfume in your eyes. It means not one of us, and not one of us, has never been safe. Your daily life shifts with the new rhythms. Egyptian masters prized elaborate preparation, oils, perfumes, wigs, endless rituals. Romans prefer efficiency. They still paint you, still dress you, still scent you, but with less ceremony. Beauty is expected, not celebrated. You are to be ready, polished like armour, without complaint. If Egyptians made you into a statue for the gods, Romans make you into a mosaic tile, one tiny piece in their grand design, replaceable if chipped. And yet, there is an honesty in Roman bluntness. Egyptians cloaked exploitation in ritual, calling it divine service. Romans call it what it is: use. They do not pretend you are sacred. They do not murmur that your smile honours Hathor. They simply command, and you obey. Brutal, yes, but at least without incense to choke on. It is strange how cruelty can feel cleaner when it sheds its disguises. Of course, the Romans bring their own absurdities. At one feast, a senator insists that the Egyptian wine is too sweet, demanding a stronger vintage from Italy. When it arrives, he promptly waters it down, the very act Egyptians were mocked for. Another Roman boasts of his disciplined legions, only to collapse under the table after too much garum-soaked pork. You learn quickly that Roman pride is as fragile as Egyptian vanity, just wrapped in different syllables. The biggest change comes not in clothing, food, or language, but in how you are moved. Egyptians kept you within palaces and temples, gilded cages where at least the walls were familiar. Romans, however, take you with them. You're led through streets filled with soldiers, past markets buzzing with Greek traders, past docks where Roman ships creak under the weight of grain destined for foreign tables. You are paraded through Alexandria, through Memphis, through places you once only dreamed of. The irony is bitter. You travel more as a slave than you ever would have as free. Travel brings new sights, but also new dangers. Crowds stare openly, some with admiration, others with scorn. Roman soldiers make jokes in Latin you half understand, their laughter sharp as spear points. Children point at your anklets and giggle, while merchants shout offers to buy you outright. You keep your gaze lowered, your steps measured. You are ornament in motion, and ornaments must never stumble. At night, when you rest in quarters colder and harsher than Egyptian chambers, you hear the clash of cultures outside your door. Egyptian servants mutter angrily about Roman arrogance. Roman guards laugh at Egyptian rituals. You lie on your mat listening, knowing you belong fully to neither world. You're too Egyptian for Rome, too Romanized now for Egypt. You're the border where two empires scrape against each other, and borders are never safe places to live. Yet even in this you adapt. You learn scraps of Latin, enough to understand when a command is meant for you, enough to catch the edge of jokes. You mimic Roman gestures, the way they raise a cup, the way they snap fingers for service. You become, as always, what they need you to be. Survival has no language, and you are fluent in its silence. Sometimes you wonder what freedom would mean now. Egypt is no. Longer Egypt, not in the way you knew it. Rome has woven its eagle wings into the lotus and nothing is untouched. If you were free tomorrow, where would you go? To villages where people bow to Roman tax collectors? To temples where offerings are tallied in Latin? The cage may have changed shape, but it still surrounds the Nile. Perhaps freedom is not a place anymore, but a thought carried quietly. like the secrets you once hoarded in banquet halls. One evening, as you serve wine to a Roman prefect, he muses aloud about the future. Rome will last forever, he declares, his words puffed up with confidence. You nearly laugh. You've seen enough to know that forever is a fragile word. Pharaohs thought the same, and their statues crumble even now. Perhaps one day Rome too will be dust, its proud words unreadable. And perhaps when that day comes, someone will whisper of the nameless slaves who survived within its shadow, unseen but enduring. You are one of them, you endure. Painted or plain, linen or stola, Egyptian or Roman, you remain. You survive the shifting tides, the foreign tongues, the illusions of both lotus and eagle. You're not free, not powerful, not safe, but you are here. And in a world where even empires fall, sometimes being here is the greatest rebellion of all. The Roman domus is a world apart from the perfumed halls of Egypt, though it still smells faintly of smoke, sweat, and wine, the universal perfume of the powerful. Here, walls are plastered with frescoes of gods, landscapes, and mythic heroes lounging like they own eternity. Mosaics glimmer underfoot, each tiny tile set with such precision you'd think Roman slaves had nothing better to do than glue pebbles together for 20 years straight. In truth, they didn't. That was the point. Rome believes order is everything, from legions in formation to the way your hair must curl exactly above your ear. Your new role in this domus is less fluid than in Egypt. In Egypt you are half ornament, half offering, drifting between temple and banquet like smoke. In Rome, your place is scheduled, as neatly slotted as the hours carved into a sundial. Morning, bathe, perfume, prepare. Midday, assist with meals. Afternoon, remain on display for guests or entertain with song. Evening, attend the convivium, Rome's version of the banquet, which is less about eating and more about showing how long you can recline on a couch without sliding off in front of senators. The convivium has its own choreography. Guests recline on couches arranged in a U-shape, heads propped up on cushions, feet sticking out like they've all fainted in unison. Platters arrive in sequence, eggs, then fish, then meats, then fruits and desserts. Wine flows constantly, mixed with water because apparently getting drunk too fast is uncivilized. You circulate between couches, pouring wine, offering trays, smiling when commanded, laughing when cued. It is a military drill disguised as leisure. If Egypt taught you to gleam, Rome teaches you to tick like a clock. Romans pride themselves on discipline, but their banquets prove otherwise. Senators lecture about virtue with wine dribbling down their chins. Philosophers debate stoicism while demanding another plate of honey cakes. One man boasts of his conquest in Gaul, then promptly falls asleep mid-sentence, snoring loud enough to drown the flute players. You learn quickly that Roman dignity is strongest before the second course, and collapses entirely by dessert. Your duties are not only about serving wine or being decoration. You're expected to entertain, though the Romans are less interested in languid dances than in wit and novelty. They want clever remarks, amusing stories, songs that flatter their ancestors. One senator insists you recite lines of poetry in Egyptian, then demands a Latin translation he cannot verify. Another commands you to sing while balancing a tray on your head. You obey, because failure is never funny to the man who gives the command. In this world, intimacy itself is organized like a civic duty. Masters keep tablets where encounters are scheduled, names written alongside appointments for baths and business meetings. You discover that Roman desire is less spontaneous passion and more bureaucratic checklist. See the accountant at noon, meet the prefect at 3, summon the pleasure slave at dusk. You're penciled into a day like a gladiator scheduled for the arena, one more event in the theatre of Roman life. If Egypt disguised exploitation with incense, Rome cloaks it in law. Everything has a category, a rule, a precedent. There are laws about who may recline at banquets, about how many guests one may invite, about the proper dilution of wine. Slaves, of course, are not people but property, listed alongside silver bowls and fine horses in estate records. You imagine some senator proudly declaring, "Yes, I own 3 vineyards, 2 villas, and 1 pleasure slave imported from Egypt," as though you are a jar of olive oil pressed under the Mediterranean sun, and yet this rigid structure carries its own absurdities. Once, a magistrate grew furious because his couch had been placed on the left instead of the right side of the dining room. He declared it an insult to his dignity, stormed out, and spent the evening sulking in his atrium. Another guest became so enamored with a mosaic of Neptune on the floor that he refused to leave, insisting he was communing with the god through eye contact. The slaves who had to carry him out later muttered that Neptune was probably filing for a restraining order. You survive this new system, as you always have, by adapting. You learn Latin phrases, enough to flatter or amuse. You mimic Roman gestures, like kissing fingers before raising them to the sky when a toast is made. You discover which senators prefer laughter, which prefer silence, which demand cleverness, which punish it. You become, once again, what they require because survival is your truest art. But the Domus teaches you something Egypt never did: how to vanish in plain sight. In Rome, the house is full of slaves, each with rigid roles. Some tend the fires, some cook, some clean, some account for the master's property. You're only one among many, and this anonymity is a strange relief. In Egypt, you gleam too brightly to be ignored. In Rome, you can sometimes slip into the background, just another shadow moving between columns. Of course, when they want you, you must dazzle. But when they don't, you are free to become invisible, and invisibility is a freedom of its own. Evenings stretch long, filled with rhetoric and theatre. Romans love speeches the way Egyptians loved incense. Guests declaim verses, argue philosophy, recite family histories that last longer than the actual republic. You sit silently, listening, absorbing words as though they were another kind of perfume. Sometimes you nearly laugh when senators thunder about the dignity of Roman freedom, while half a dozen slaves stand fanning them with peacock feathers. Freedom, it seems, is always relative to the couch you're reclining on. The baths are another world, one you are sometimes led into as companion or ornament. Steam clouds the marble halls, voices echo against domed ceilings, bodies gleam with oil and water. Romans treat baths as both hygiene and social theatre. Deals are struck in the steam, alliances whispered between plunges in cold pools. You, oiled and perfumed, sit at the edge, a living ornament even here. The absurdity is not lost on you. Cleanliness may be next to godliness, but apparently it is also next to gossip. Through it all, the structure of Roman life presses on you like a stone weight. Every task has its hour, every gesture its rule, every silence its place. You are never free, but you are rarely lost. The order is suffocating, but it is also predictable. Egypt felt like drowning in perfume and illusion. Rome feels like marching in chains to the beat of a drum. Neither is freedom, but each has its rhythm, and rhythm is something you can learn to endure. At night, when the domus grows quiet and frescoes fade into shadow, you lie on your straw pallet and let the day replay in your mind. You think of the senator who tripped on his toga, of the guest who argued passionately about the virtue of moderation while drinking enough wine to float a ship, of the master who wrote your name on a tablet as though you were an appointment to be checked off. You smile faintly in the dark. Rome believes it is eternal, but you can already see the cracks. A system so rigid cannot help but break, and when it does, perhaps the mosaics will shatter, the frescoes peel, the laws crumble into forgotten Latin. But you, silent, enduring, unseen, you may still be here. You're not free, but you remain. And sometimes, remaining is the truest victory. Steam curls upward in white, clouds turning the marble halls hazy, as if the gods themselves were stirring soup from Olympus. The Roman bathhouse is more than a place to scrub dirt away. It is a theatre, a marketplace, a senate hall, and a gossip mill wrapped in mist. And in this theatre, you are an ornament once again, though now your stage is slipperier and your audience louder. The first thing that strikes you is the sound. Voices echo against the domed ceilings, magnified until even whispers bounce like shouts. The splash of water, the slap of sandals on wet floors, the laughter of soldiers boasting of campaigns, everything collides into a constant roar. If Egyptian banquets hummed like bees, Roman bathhouses thunder like storms, and in that storm you drift like a perfumed reed boat, visible yet unseen, always where you're told to be. Your presence is not for hygiene. No one expects you to plunge into the hot caldarium or scrub your back with strigils. You're there to adorn, to pour wine, to fetch towels, to smile at the right senator and laugh faintly at the prefect's joke about hairy Gauls. You're there to remind everyone that even in the steam, Rome is rich enough to surround itself with beauty. Nothing says empire like having a decorated servant casually sitting beside the plunge pool while men argue about tax reforms. You quickly learn the rhythms of the bath. The procession begins with the tepidarium, a warm room where men strip away not only their tunics but also their inhibitions. Then comes the caldarium, the hot chamber where steam clings so thick you could carve your name into it. Finally, the frigidarium, the cold plunge that shocks bodies into yelps and boasts. Between these stations, business is transacted as smoothly as oil poured onto skin. Land sales, political favours, even military orders, decisions that shape provinces are sealed while men drip like overcooked dumplings. You sit quietly, invisible decoration, yet your ears are wide open. You hear governors muttering about grain shortages, senators whispering about rivals, generals boasting of legions. It is the same as Egypt, yet harsher, faster, louder. Rome does not whisper its secrets. Rome shouts them across the steam and trusts that no one will dare repeat them. But you are not no one. You are the invisible listener again, gathering stories like towels, folding them neatly into memory. The humour here is endless. Once, a senator slipped on the marble floor and landed in the plunge pool with the elegance of a dying fish. His attendants rushed to help, but he waved them off, declaring it was a ritual purification. Another time, two philosophers debated stoicism while standing naked in the frigidarium, shivering so violently their words came out like hiccups. You nearly laughed aloud, biting your lip so hard you tasted blood. If wisdom is measured by how long one can pontificate while freezing, these men must be saints. There are darker jokes too. Romans boast of their discipline, but the bathhouse reveals their hypocrisy. One man who railed against Greek decadence spent half an hour adjusting his hair in polished bronze mirrors. Another scolded soldiers for laziness while demanding 4 slaves rub him with oil at once. You wonder if hypocrisy is another Roman virtue carved invisibly into their laws. Not all moments are absurd. Some are strangely tender. You see a father teaching his young son to swim in the plunge pool, holding him gently as the boy kicks in panic. You see an old senator leaning on a slave's shoulder, his legs too weak to carry him, muttering about battles fought half a century ago. You see soldiers laughing together, scars visible on their skin, the camaraderie of survival outweighing politics. These glimpses remind you that beneath the marble and arrogance, Rome is made of fragile flesh, the same as Egypt, the same as you. Yet, you're not fooled. The bathhouse is also a place of danger. A careless glance at the wrong man, a smile misinterpreted, a silence mistaken for mockery, any of these could turn the steam suffocating. Once, a prefect demanded you sing while perched at the edge of the hot pool. Your throat was raw from the heat, your body dizzy from the steam, but you sang anyway, voice trembling like the water's surface. Another time, a senator ordered you to carry wine across the slick floor. You nearly slipped, saving the amphora at the cost of bruising your knee. His laughter rang louder than the splash. There are rumours, too, that bathhouses hide more than business. Slaves whisper of murders staged as accidents, of poisons slipped into wine, of alliances sealed in embraces behind curtained alcoves. The steam conceals much, and Rome thrives on what can be concealed. You keep your eyes lowered, though you feel the current swirling around you. To survive in a bathhouse is not to bathe. It is to avoid drowning in politics. The rituals of oiling are constant. After the plunge, men stretch on benches, and slaves scrape their skin with strigils, pulling away sweat and grime. You sometimes hand the oil, the strigil, the towel, though never the dignity. That remains firmly in Roman hands, even when they squirm like children under the scrape of bronze. Once, a soldier yelped so loudly during scraping that he claimed Mars himself had pinched him. The joke lasted 3 days. Perfume cones melt here too, though the steam often drowns their scent. You wear one anyway, the wax dripping slowly down your wig as though you're a candle lit in honour of Rome's vanity. The guests laugh, saying the steam makes you glow. You know it simply makes you sweat. But the illusion is more important than comfort. Rome does not care if you suffocate so long as you suffocate beautifully. What strikes you most is how nakedness changes nothing. In Egypt, nudity was functional, tied to the heat, the Nile, the fields. In Rome, nudity in the bath is supposed to symbolize equality. Senators, generals, merchants, all unclothed, all flesh. Yet the hierarchy remains. A senator is still a senator even when gooseflesh covers his arms. A slave is still a slave even when gold jewelry is set aside. Equality, it turns out, evaporates faster than steam. At night, when the bathhouse empties and marble floors cool, you think about the day. You replay the senator's fall, the philosopher's shivers, the prefect's commands. You think about how Rome has turned even bathing into spectacle, how nothing is private, not even a splash of water. You wonder if perhaps Rome fears silence more than anything. Steam and laughter fill every corner, as though quiet itself might be dangerous. And in that thought lies your small rebellion. For you, silence is not fear, but strength. You absorb, you remember, you endure. They may shout their secrets into steam, but you carry them into darkness, storing them like treasure. One day, when their frescoes fade and their mosaics crack, perhaps your silent memory will outlast them all. So you return day after day to the bathhouse theatre. You smile when commanded, laugh when required, fetch when ordered. You endure the steam, the noise, the absurdity. You watch senators slip, philosophers shiver, generals boast, fathers teach, sons splash. You remain ornament, listener, ghost in the steam, and in remaining, you endure. The amphitheatre roars before you even reach it. The sound rises like thunder, a living creature made of tens of thousands of throats all shouting at once. In Egypt, the loudest gatherings you knew were feasts or temple festivals. Here in Rome, noise itself is worship. The air is thick with dust kicked up from sand, sweat pouring from bodies pressed together on stone benches, and the smell of roasted nuts mingling with iron. The faint tang of blood that clings to the arena like perfume that never fades. You're not here as spectator by choice. You're here because your master thinks nothing shows status quite like arriving at the games, with perfumed slaves in tow. The Colosseum dwarfs every palace you have ever known. Its arches climb skyward like a ladder to nowhere. Its corridors coil with endless streams of people, senators in gleaming togas, merchants shouting bets, soldiers swaggering with the arrogance of men who believe the empire will never fall. You shuffle among them, an ornament among ornaments, your gold bangles chiming faintly, your linen stola clinging in the heat. To the crowd, you're not human. You're a symbol of luxury, a moving backdrop to someone else's power. The games begin with spectacle. Trumpets blare, echoing so loudly they rattle your teeth. Processions march in, gladiators shining with oil, animals caged and snarling, priests chanting prayers that seem absurd against the roar of the mob. Your master reclines in his cushioned seat, sipping watered wine, nodding as though he personally trained every beast. You stand behind him, still as a statue, your face painted into polite detachment. Inside, though, your stomach knots. You have seen death before, slaves beaten, soldiers wounded, but never turned into theatre. The first blood comes quickly. A gladiator, bare-chested, thrusts a spear into a leopard lunging across the sand. The animal collapses, dust rising around its body, the crowd erupting in cheers so loud the stone itself seems to tremble. You flinch, but no one notices, or rather, no one cares. To them this is not cruelty but entertainment. The leopard is not a beast but a performance, and the gladiator, he's not a man but a prop, much like you. The fights continue, each one more elaborate than the last. Nets and tridents clash against swords and shields, chariots circle, wheels spraying sand, horses foaming at the mouth. Men dressed as mythic heroes reenact tales you once saw painted on temple walls, except here the gods do not protect. They watch men bleed for applause. The crowd shouts, bets fly. The noise rises and falls like waves crashing on stone. Your master laughs, clapping, shouting, "Habit! He's had it!" when a gladiator stumbles. You remain silent, though the words burn in your throat. The cruelty extends beyond the fighters. At interludes, prisoners are dragged in, condemned to die for theft, rebellion, or sometimes nothing at all. They are thrown before lions, before bears, before the jeering mob. You watch one man fall to his knees, pleading, his voice lost in the roar. The animals leap and the crowd cheers as if watching a play. You bite the inside of your cheek until you taste blood. If Rome can cheer for this, what chance do you ever have of being seen as human? And yet the absurdity is always close behind the horror. Once, an ostrich escaped its handlers and sprinted across the arena, dodging gladiators and scattering soldiers. The crowd laughed louder than they ever had at blood. Another time, A gladiator tripped on his own helmet, sprawling so comically that even your master wheezed with laughter. Rome adores grandeur, but Rome also loves humiliation. You realize then that the line between hero and fool is as thin as a sandal strap. The games are not only about death, they are about power. Every cheer is a declaration that Rome controls not only men but beasts, not only enemies but nature itself. Bread is handed out freely, wine flows, the crowd is fed and entertained. Your master whispers smugly that no one rebels when their bellies are full and their eyes dazzled. You wonder if the same logic applies to you. Perfumed, adorned, paraded. Are you not also fed illusions so you do not rise? Rome's greatest trick is not its legions, but its spectacles. They make everyone believe the cage is a gift. You notice the hierarchies even in the seats. Senators recline closest to the action, their togas pristine even when dust rises. Merchants and freedmen sit higher, craning their necks. Women are relegated to certain rows, though many shout louder than men. Slaves, of course, stand at the edges, unless they are dragged into the arena itself. You glance at them, wondering which is worse, watching or being watched. Sometimes your duties extend beyond silent ornamentation. Your master orders you to fan him with peacock feathers, to pour wine into his cup without spilling, to laugh at his jokes about the gladiators. Once, he commands you to sing softly while the crowd howls for blood, as though the contrast amuses him. Your voice trembles, barely audible against the roar, but he smirks, satisfied. You wonder if cruelty is sweeter to him when wrapped in music. At night, when the games end and the crowd disperses, the sand of the arena is stained dark. Slaves rush to rake it smooth, as if erasing death makes it less real. Your master leaves smiling, declaring that Rome's greatness has been proven once again. You walk behind him, silent, the image of torn bodies seared into your eyes. You will dream of lions leaping, of swords flashing, of cheers ringing louder than screams. Rome calls it entertainment. You call it nightmare. And yet, even nightmares have their absurd echoes. You recall the ostrich's frantic sprint, the gladiator tripping, the senator shouting until his wig slipped sideways. These memories mingle with the horror, proof that even in cruelty, comedy sneaks in. Perhaps that is humanity's strangest defense, finding laughter in the sand soaked with blood. The amphitheater becomes another lesson. In Egypt, you learned that beauty was currency. In Rome, you learn that pain is spectacle. Both teach you the same truth. Survival is performance. Gladiators perform to live another day. Slaves perform to avoid notice. Even masters perform, puffing their chests, laughing too loudly, pretending they are eternal. The arena strips away the disguise. Everyone here is playing a role, hoping the crowd applauds instead of jeers. When you lie on your pallet that night, you think of the gladiators. They too are enslaved, yet in the arena they wield swords, at least for a moment, at least with the illusion of choice. You, painted and perfumed, wield nothing, and yet you endure. You wonder who is freer, the man who dies with a weapon in his hand, or the one who survives by lowering his eyes. There is no answer, only the steady truth that survival itself is a rebellion, quiet but relentless. Tomorrow you will be summoned again, perhaps to another convivium, perhaps back to the bathhouse, perhaps once more to the amphitheater. Wherever Rome parades you, you will stand, smile, endure. You will laugh when commanded, sing when ordered, pour when cued, and you will continue to see everything, the cruelty, the absurdity, the cracks in the empire's stone facade. Rome believes its spectacles will last forever. You know better. Even empires fade, even cheers fall silent, and when they do, perhaps the memory of those who endured, the slaves, the gladiators, the unseen, will linger longer than marble arches. For now you endure. The arena roars, the lions leap, the swords flash, the bracelets chime, and you remain. Coins jingle everywhere in Rome, and you soon realize that desire itself is one of the city's most reliable currencies. If in Egypt beauty was dressed up as devotion, here in Rome it is counted like silver, tallied like grain, exchanged like contracts. The domus may glitter with mosaics and frescoes, but behind those painted walls, bodies are just another part of the marketplace, and your body, perfumed and adorned, is treated as much a commodity as jars of olive oil or amphora of wine. It begins with the casual remarks you overhear. A senator brags to another, "That one is worth more than my finest horse," gesturing lazily toward you as if comparing breeds. A merchant chuckles, "I had her sing last month. My clients sealed their deal after the second verse." They speak not of people but of assets, investments, bargaining chips. Their tone is the same whether they discuss land, ships, or you. That tone burns more than any chain. Your master is well aware of this currency. He displays you not only at feasts but also at negotiations, as though your smile could lubricate contracts, your laugh could sweeten bargains, your presence could prove his wealth more than any coin purse. When guests arrive, he gestures toward you with pride, saying, "Even Egypt sends me treasures." You lower your eyes, the compliment meant for him, never for you. The trade of intimacy is not always direct, but it shapes everything. Who dines with whom, who reclines closest to the host, who laughs at which joke. These choices ripple like stones thrown into water, shifting alliances, building debts. Sometimes you feel less like a person, and more like a coin tossed into the air, flipping silently until you land in someone's hand. There are absurdities that make the system almost laughable. Once, two nobles argued heatedly about whether your hair smelled more of lotus or cinnamon, nearly coming to blows before realizing they were both wrong. The perfume was myrrh. Another time, a guest declared he could value you more accurately than any appraiser, then spent half an hour listing ridiculous comparisons. She's worth 2 amphorae of Spanish wine, 1 Nubian horse, and at least 3 crates of Sicilian oranges. You smiled faintly while servants stifled laughter in the corner. If you are currency, then at least you're an inflation-proof one. But beneath the humour lies danger. To be treated as currency means you can be exchanged. More than once, your master has loaned you to a guest as casually as he lends a goblet. The language is always polite. Entertain him, accompany her, bring cheer to their household, but the meaning is clear. You are a token traded to strengthen ties, a living pledge of goodwill. Each time you swallow the bitter, truth. Survival depends not on your will, but on your ability to play the part convincingly. Rome has perfected this economy of desire. Courtesans are trained in rhetoric as well as dance, their wit as valuable as their beauty. Slaves like you are categorized, priced, compared. A Greek poet once joked, "Rome has more markets for pleasure than for bread." You think he was not far from the truth, and yet you notice the same irony here as in Egypt. Those who own you are trapped as well. Senators puff themselves up with mistresses and concubines, but their reputations depend on endless displays of control. A noble woman may scorn you, but her own marriage was arranged like a treaty, her intimacy just as transactional as yours. Everyone is currency in Rome, only the denominations differ. Sometimes, in rare, quiet moments, you imagine flipping the balance. What if you whispered a secret learned in the bathhouse at the right time, trading knowledge instead of smiles? What if you hinted at a senator's indiscretion, leveraging silence as your own coin? The thought tempts you, sharp as a blade. But temptation in Rome is lethal. To trade knowledge openly would be to gamble your life, and you know better than to wager without a chance to win. Still, small rebellions slip through. When nobles boast of your value, you tilt your head just so, forcing them to stumble mid-sentence, suddenly aware you're listening. When your master parades you, you smile faintly, but with an edge sharp enough that some guests glance twice, uncertain whether they've truly owned the moment. These are your hidden coins, expressions, silences, looks. Small, but yours. There are moments of absurd comedy even in this harsh marketplace. A senator once tried to impress you by reciting Greek poetry, only to mispronounce every word until he claimed confidently that Homer was clearly Roman at heart. Another guest, so eager to display his wealth, poured wine over his own lap while insisting he spared no expense. You smiled sweetly, though inside you imagined Rome collapsing under the weight of its own vanity. And yet, through all of this, you survive. You learn the prices spoken in whispers, the values assigned in jest, the debts implied by a single glance. You become fluent in the economy of desire, though you never chose to study it. And in that fluency, you endure. At night, lying on your straw pallet, you reflect on the day's trades. You think of the senator who compared you to oranges, the merchant who boasted of your song, the master who displayed you as proof of wealth. You smile faintly in the dark. If they insist on treating you as currency, then perhaps you are the most enduring coin of all, the one that never leaves circulation, the one that outlasts empires. Gold tarnishes, silver corrodes, marble crumbles. But memory, your silent record of everything you've witnessed, cannot be spent away. And so, you endure another day in Rome's strange marketplace of intimacy. You are painted, perfumed, paraded, exchanged. You are laughed at, praised, traded, admired. Your coin and ornament, currency and symbol. But beneath it all, you remain what you have always been, enduring, silent, alive. The Romans loved order in their daily lives, but when festival time arrived, all that order toppled like a drunken senator falling from his couch. Saturnalia was the grandest of them all, a week when rules bent, roles flipped, and the entire empire seemed to wobble on its marble pedestal. For you, Saturnalia was not freedom, but it was the closest thing you would ever taste. Freedom's aftertaste, freedom's shadow, freedom poured into a clay cup and watered down. The first sign of Saturnalia was always the garlands. Laurel, ivy, pine. Suddenly the domus bloomed with green as though nature had staged a takeover. Masters exchanged their stiff togas for bright caps, felt hats called pileus, the very symbol of freedom usually worn by emancipated slaves. The irony was as thick as the wine. For 1 week your masters dressed like the thing they most feared, slaves who could no longer be commanded. You smiled faintly as you fastened ivy into their hair, wondering if they realized the joke was on them. Feasts during Saturnalia were chaos incarnate. The rules of rank dissolved. Masters served slaves at the table, though with exaggerated gestures that made the parody obvious. Coins were tossed into the air, gifts exchanged, wax candles, little figurines, sometimes even clothing. You received a scarf one year, coarse and scratchy, but it was the first thing anyone had ever given you without immediately demanding something in return. You kept it tucked under your mat for years, not for its warmth, but for the absurdity of the gesture. Saturnalia also meant gambling. Dice clattered across tables, coins rolled, bets rose louder than prayers in temples. Everyone gambled, senators, children, matrons, slaves. For once, you could throw dice openly without risking a beating. Of course, you had no money to bet, so you wagered jokes, songs, small favours. Once you won a senator's ring with a lucky throw, only to return it minutes later, pretending you had no use for such finery. Inside, you savoured the look on his face, the brief sting of losing to someone he considered beneath notice. Masks were everywhere, painted faces of gods, beasts, grotesques. Nobles and slaves alike wore them, their features hidden beneath grinning clay. The mask allowed you to laugh louder, to glance longer, to speak a word you might otherwise choke on. For a moment everyone blurred, slave and master indistinguishable, all just voices behind painted smiles. But masks also carried their own danger. They promised freedom, but they also hid cruelty. More than once you felt a hand grip your arm too tightly, the mask above it grinning while the eyes behind it stayed sharp. Saturnalia gave permission for chaos, and chaos rarely remembered kindness. Still, for a few nights, laughter outweighed fear. Bonfires lit streets, music thundered, processions filled alleys with dancers and drummers. You joined the whirl, your linen swirling, your gold jingling, your laughter spilling out louder than usual. People cheered, wine splashed, the world spun like a wheel. For the first time in years you forgot to lower your eyes. The mask gave you cover, and in cover you found a flicker of yourself. The festival also revealed the fragility of Roman order. Masters who spent the rest of the year boasting of discipline now stumbled drunkenly through the streets. Senators who lectured on dignity sang bawdy songs off-key. Noblewomen who scorned you at banquets tossed dice with slaves, laughing until tears smudged their coal. Saturnalia was Rome turned upside down, and you relished the absurdity. If the empire was so eternal, why did it need a week every year to mock itself? 1 year, during the height of Saturnalia, your master declared that you would be king of the feast. A mock king was chosen every festival, given the right to command others for a day. When the lot fell to you, laughter rippled through the room. They expected you to issue ridiculous orders, to play the fool, to remind them of their power by abusing it clumsily. Instead, you smiled and ordered the musicians to play faster, the servants to bring more food, the guests to drink deeper. Harmless commands, yet they pleased everyone. By the end of the night, your master clapped you on the shoulder, declaring you had the makings of a politician. You bowed, hiding the sting of irony. Rome would burn before it let you hold real power. But the memory lingered. For one night, they obeyed you. For one night, senators fetched bread at your word, matrons filled your cup, slaves laughed with you as though you were one of them. The illusion faded by dawn, of course. The next morning you were back in your role, stripped of your crown, your scarf folded beneath your mat again. Yet the taste of it lingered, like the aftertaste of wine that refuses to wash away. The danger of Saturnalia was that it gave hope, a cruel hope, because it always ended. When the garlands withered and the dice were put away, when the pileus was stored and togas resumed their stiffness, Rome returned to its order. Masters grew stern again, slaves lowered their eyes again, senators pretended dignity had never slipped. The festival was a release valve, a way for Rome to keep the cage from shattering, give the people a week of laughter, then chain them tighter the next. And yet, you could not hate Saturnalia. It was the only time you glimpsed a Rome where laughter was not punished, where masks hid chains as well as faces, where dice rolled freely for everyone. It was absurd, yes, but absurdity has its own kind of power. The world may be cruel, but during Saturnalia the cruelty wore a grin, and you could grin back. There were smaller festivals too. Floralia with its riot of flowers, Lupercalia with its wild races and half-naked runners striking women with thongs of goat hide to ensure fertility. You remember hiding your laughter as matrons stretched out their hands eagerly, pretending to be scandalized while jostling for a good strike. Rome was nothing if not inventive in turning ritual into theatre. For you, each festival was another mask layered over the cage. For a day or a week you danced, laughed, gambled, sang. You played roles you could never touch otherwise, and when the festival ended you folded those roles like old garments, tucking them into memory, worn but not discarded. Perhaps one day, when Rome itself wore out, those memories would be all that remained. At night, when Saturnalia faded and silence returned to the domus, you lay on your mat, the scarf still hidden beneath you, the taste of dice still on your tongue, the sound of laughter still echoing faintly. You whispered to yourself, "Once I was king." No one heard. No one needed to. The memory itself was crown enough. The banquets, the bathhouses, the arenas, these were all theatres of power. But sometimes Rome's power flexed in quieter places. Gardens lit by lamplight, atriums lined with scrolls, evenings when philosophers and poets gathered with wine cups and egos overflowing. You, perfumed as always, became part of those gatherings too, not as spectacle this time, but as a kind of muse. To be clear, muse was not a title you earned. It was one they assigned, like draping a cloak across your shoulders and claiming it always belonged there. The first time a poet declared you his inspiration, you nearly laughed. He leaned back, his hair in carefully messy curls, and announced to the room that your eyes burned brighter than the torches of Vulcan. This while you were holding a tray of figs. You smiled faintly, because the tray was heavy, and because no one likes a muse who interrupts to say, "Actually, my eyes burn because you spilled cinnamon in them earlier." Philosophers treated you differently. They didn't compare you to stars, they compared you to ideas. One Stoic muttered that your endurance was proof of the human soul's capacity to transcend suffering. Another Epicurean declared your laughter proof that pleasure was the highest good. To them, you weren't a person at all but an argument in flesh. You could almost imagine your body being passed around like a scroll. Exhibit A, the slave who smiles. Discuss. There was a certain absurdity in it, though. Men who argued passionately about freedom of the soul never noticed the chains on your ankles. Men who debated whether virtue or pleasure was the greater goal never asked what you wanted. To them you were both metaphor and furniture, inspiring thoughts they'd later claim as their own. You once joked silently to yourself that if Plato had seen you, he'd have stuck, you in his cave as proof of shadows. Still, there were moments of unexpected tenderness in those evenings. A young poet once pressed a papyrus into your hand, shyly whispering that he'd written a verse just for you. You read it later by lamplight. It was clumsy, full of overwrought metaphors comparing you to the Tiber River and to honey dripping from heaven, which frankly sounded like a sticky nightmare. But for a moment the words were yours, not your master's, not Rome's. Even if they were terrible poetry, they acknowledged you existed as someone more than ornament. That was a rarity you treasured. The poets loved to perform, their voices rising dramatically, gestures grand. They recited verses of gods and battles, of love that spanned oceans, of grief that bent men's knees. You listened silently, absorbing words that painted worlds you could never see. Greece, Troy, faraway lands across seas. Your cage stretched only as far as Rome allowed, but through poetry you glimpsed distances. You wondered if Homer, whoever he truly was, ever thought his epics would be recited beside half-eaten platters of olives, while slaves refilled cups. Philosophers, by contrast, argued like children bickering over bread. Stoics preached self-control while their hands trembled with wine. Cynics sneered at wealth while sitting on marble benches. Epicureans extolled simple living while demanding the finest figs. You kept your face smooth, but inside you marvelled at how often wisdom and hypocrisy reclined on the same couch. If Socrates had been present, you thought, he'd have drunk the hemlock early just to escape the noise. Sometimes they dragged you into their debates. A philosopher once asked if you thought happiness came from virtue or pleasure. You answered carefully, from survival. The table roared with laughter, mistaking your truth for wit. The philosopher clapped his hands, declaring you a natural stoic. You bowed, hiding the sting. It was easier to let them believe you were clever in the way they wanted than to explain what you truly meant. Other times they asked you to sing verses. You memorized lines quickly, repeating them with a voice smooth enough to make them nod in satisfaction. They praised your memory, your clarity, your expression. None of them realized that while you recited their words, you were also storing their whispers, their secrets, their contradictions. Every poem, every argument, every boast etched into you like lines on papyrus. The humour of these gatherings often came unplanned. Once, a poet grew so carried away with his own recitation that he toppled backward into a fountain, sputtering like a fish while guests applauded as though it were part of the act. Another time, two philosophers debated so loudly about the nature of the soul that they failed to notice the candles had burned down to nothing. They argued in total darkness, unaware that most guests had already slipped out. You stayed, listening, partly out of duty, partly out of amusement. Yet there were moments when the room quieted, when words turned soft instead of sharp. A poet recited lines about loss, about a lover buried too soon, and the laughter hushed. For a moment, you saw past the masks of wealth and rhetoric to the human grief beneath. Your eyes met his, and for a flicker he seemed to see you, not as muse, not as metaphor, but as another human carrying grief you could never speak. The moment passed, swallowed by applause, but it lingered with you. The Romans believed memory could grant immortality. Names carved into stone, verses etched onto papyrus, ideas debated until they echoed across centuries. You wondered if perhaps being their muse meant your shadow might linger in those words, hidden but alive. When a poet declared, "Her eyes were like burning torches," perhaps one day someone would read it and think of you, though they'd never know your name. It was not freedom, but it was a kind of ghostly survival, and yet you never forgot the absurd edge of it all. Men who claimed to chase eternal truth still spilled wine on their scrolls. Philosophers who spoke of universal equality still ordered you to fetch more figs. Poets who sang of love still traded you like coin. Their words soared, but their lives stumbled. You realized then that maybe philosophy and poetry were not so different from the arenas and banquets. All of it was theatre, all of it performance. And you, as always, were part of the scenery. Sometimes statue, sometimes metaphor, always silent. At night, when the poets and philosophers dispersed, leaving only half-burned candles and wine stains, you lay on your mat replaying their words. You repeated verses silently, savouring the rhythm, the sound of distant seas and heroes' names. You considered the arguments about virtue and pleasure, about freedom and duty, and found them shallow compared to the simple truth you lived: survival. Perhaps survival itself was a philosophy, one too humble for marble halls but too enduring to be silenced. And so another role was added to your collection. Not only ornament, not only coin, not only offering, you were muse, metaphor, idea. They draped you in words as they draped you in gold, neither of which truly belonged to you. Yet you carried them all the same, silently enduring, silently remembering. Rome taught you many things, how to stand still as marble, how to laugh on command, how to sparkle like gold without ever touching it. But the most valuable lesson you learned was resistance, not the loud, sword-drawn kind that filled amphitheatres, but the quiet, stubborn sort that hid in plain sight. A glance withheld, a smile delayed, a silence stretched too long, these became your weapons, your rebellions disguised as obedience. You could not shout no, not in Rome, not in Egypt, not anywhere your life had taken you. But you could turn yes into something slippery, something that slid out of grasp like an eel in the Nile. When a senator demanded you sing, you sang softly. So softly he leaned forward, straining to hear, making his need louder than your compliance. When your master ordered you to laugh at a guest's joke, you let the chuckle spill late, making it clear you were laughing at the pause, not the punchline. Tiny gestures, invisible to most, but enough to carve a sliver of control back into your own body. There were days when you found rebellion in stillness. You became so quiet that nobles forgot you were even there. They talked freely, boasting of plots, confessing fears, revealing weaknesses. You stored those secrets, not because you could use them, but because remembering was its own kind of power. You were not a blank wall. You were a mirror, one they never realized reflected them back. Other times, resistance came through humor. You told yourself jokes in silence, mocking the pomp around you. When a noblewoman scolded you for pouring wine too slowly, you imagined answering, "Apologies, mistress. I was pondering the nature of time itself." When a priest claimed you were blessed to serve in sacred rituals, you thought, "Blessed? If this is blessing, I'd hate to see curse." These inner jests kept you alive, laughter curling inside where no one could steal it. Even your body became a tool of subtle defiance. You learned to walk in ways that made your chains less noisy, denying them their triumph of sound. You carried trays with a grace that mocked their attempts to reduce you to beast of burden. You learned to hold your head just high enough to remind yourself you were still human, even if no one else believed it. Sometimes you resisted by remembering. You remembered the Nile, its cool mud between your toes. You remembered songs sung by other slaves in whispers, tunes that carried comfort across darkened chambers. You remembered fragments of stories, half-heard myths about gods who disguised themselves as mortals. Memory became your rebellion, because it proved you had a self that existed before and might exist after the cage. Of course, resistance carried danger. A wrong glance could mean punishment. A delayed smile could invite suspicion. Once, a prefect accused you of insolence for serving him wine with your eyes lowered instead of raised. You survived only because your master laughed, calling it Egyptian modesty. You learned then that resistance had to be invisible, as subtle as perfume, sensed but never caught. And yet, even in danger, you felt the spark of victory in small acts. Once, during Saturnalia, you deliberately spilled dice so they rolled perfectly in your favour, winning a round against a senator. The room erupted in laughter, the noble humiliated, but the rules of the festival saved you. Another time you forgot to polish a bangle so it glimmered less than usual, a silent rejection of being paraded like treasure. None noticed but you, and that was enough. There were nights you resisted only by surviving. Simply waking again the next morning, still breathing, still remembering, felt like defiance. Rome thrived on spectacle, on the drama of dominance. By refusing to collapse into despair, you denied it one more victory. You told yourself, "They expect me to break. I will not give them that show," and so you endured, stubborn as stone, silent as shadow. Other slaves practiced resistance too, each in their own way. A kitchen servant salted stews a fraction too much when angry, smiling faintly as nobles squirmed. A bathhouse attendant, accidentally, overheated the caldarium so senators sweated like pigs. A musician deliberately played one note off in a hymn, daring anyone to notice. None of these acts toppled Rome, but each carved a crack in the wall. You carried these cracks in your heart, a secret mosaic of defiance pieced together from 1,000 invisible rebellions. Sometimes you dreamed of louder resistance. You imagined slipping poison into a senator's cup, imagined shouting truths into the amphitheatre, imagined walking out of the domus and never returning. But dreams you knew could be as dangerous as actions. You kept them folded away, like the scarf from Saturnalia hidden beneath your mat. Dreams were safe so long as they remained whispers to yourself. Even in philosophy, you found ways to resist. When Stoics declared that freedom came from mastering desire, you muttered silently, "Freedom comes from not being owned." When Epicureans praised pleasure, you thought, "Pleasure without choice is only another chain." When poets called you muse, you reminded yourself that muses are goddesses, not property. Their words could not define you unless you allowed them. The greatest resistance, perhaps, was in refusing to forget yourself. They stripped you, painted you, perfumed you, renamed you, paraded you, but inside you whispered your true name, the one you were born with, the one they never spoke. You repeated it each night before sleep, a sacred chant, a reminder that beneath the masks, the ornaments, the metaphors, there was still you. They could own your body, but your memory belonged only to you, and sometimes you resisted by imagining their downfall. You pictured senators' villas crumbling, frescoes peeling, mosaics cracking, amphitheatres sinking into weeds. You imagined Rome one day as ruins, its arrogance buried under sand. And you laughed silently, because history itself was the greatest rebel, toppling empires no matter how eternal they claimed to be. One evening, a philosopher asked during a convivium, "What is the greatest strength of mankind?" Guests argued, "Courage, wisdom, wealth, piety." You wanted to answer, "Endurance," because you knew it better than all of them. Endurance was survival turned into resistance, pain turned into proof, silence turned into song. And you, painted, perfumed, chained, endured. At night, lying on your pallet, you replayed the day's small victories, a late laugh, a silent joke, a hidden glance. They were tiny, invisible, but they were yours. And in a world where everything else was taken, owning even scraps of defiance felt like freedom. So you endured, you resisted, you remembered. Not with swords, not with shouts, but with silence sharp as a blade, with laughter hidden in your chest, with memories no one could erase. Rome might never notice. History might never record it. But you knew. And that knowledge itself was resistance enough. Time is relentless in Rome, as it was in Egypt, as it is everywhere. You begin to notice it not in the grand events, emperors rising and falling, temples being dedicated, wars declared, but in your own body. Once you gleamed with oils like polished bronze, your laughter summoned easily, your steps light despite heavy jewellery. Now, when you rise from your mat in the morning, your joints creak softly, a sound only you hear. When you smile on command, the skin around your eyes folds a little deeper. The masters may not notice yet, but you do. And you know what happens to pleasure slaves who age out of their usefulness. In your world, beauty has always been currency, and currency devalues with time. You've seen it happen before. A slave once admired for her singing voice grew hoarse. She was sent to grind grain until her fingers blistered. Another, once praised for her smooth skin, bore scars after illness. She was traded away for a mule. Rome, like Egypt, thrives on performance, and when performers falter, the stage does not forgive. You start to think about reinvention, about how survival means more than merely breathing. It means adapting when the role written for you no longer fits. Some pleasure slaves find ways to linger in the domus by becoming confidants, arranging letters, teaching music to children. Others slip quietly into kitchens, trading perfume for the smoke of cooking fires. Some fade into the background entirely, shadows who once shimmered. You do not want to fade, you want to endure. Your first strategy is silence. As your body changes, you offer fewer words, fewer smiles, saving your energy for moments when they matter. Paradoxically, this restraint earns you a kind of gravitas. Nobles begin to murmur that you are mysterious, reserved, even wise. They mistake weariness for wisdom, silence for depth. You let them believe it, because belief is another kind of protection. At the same time, you lean into memory. You have stored decades of secrets, of overheard whispers, of jokes and scandals. Now, when younger slaves are scolded for clumsiness, you quietly guide them, whispering which guests laugh at mistakes and which punish them, which senators prefer songs to silence, which matrons envy beauty and which despise it. You become a map of survival, and maps are valuable. Even masters begin to notice, asking your opinion on how to seat guests, which perfumes to use, which musicians to hire. You never answer fully, but just enough to remind them you are useful in ways beyond adornment. There are humiliations, of course. Guests still expect you to sparkle, even when your shine has dulled. A senator once demanded you sing, then laughed when your voice cracked. Your master's wife once scolded you for looking tired, as though exhaustion itself were an insult to Rome. You swallow these moments, but they sit heavy, pressing on you like stones. You know the day will come when they outweigh whatever usefulness you can still feign, and yet aging gives you weapons youth never did. You are no longer blinded by the shimmer of jewellery or the false flattery of poets. You see clearly now how fragile Rome is, how desperately it clings to spectacle. The younger slaves, still dazzled by perfume and praise, believe the illusions. You smile faintly, knowing illusions always crack. Your endurance, your survival, your memory, these are the things Rome cannot polish or parade, but they are also the things Rome cannot steal. You begin to craft small refugees. At night you sit with younger slaves, telling them stories, sometimes real, sometimes invented, about Egypt, about gods who protected the powerless, about spirits who punished cruelty. They listen wide-eyed, grateful for words that remind them the cage is not the whole world. You know the stories may not save them, but they may give them the spark to endure a little longer. And that spark is a gift more precious than gold. There is humour in aging too, though it is sharp-edged. Once, a drunken poet slurred that your eyes no longer shine as they once did, to which you nearly replied, "That's because I've seen too much of you." Another time, a senator tried to flirt by boasting of his youthful conquests only for his wig to slip sideways mid-sentence. You stifled your laughter, thinking, "At least when I age I don't have to glue youth to my head." Rome may worship beauty, but its own masters cannot escape time's cruelty either. The greatest danger is being discarded. You've seen it happen in both Egypt and Rome. Slaves too old to please are sold cheaply, sent to farms, kitchens, or worse, left to wither in obscurity. You fear this fate, but you prepare for it. You store away kindness from younger slaves, so that if you are cast down, someone might still help you. You memorize routes through the domus, so that if you're ordered away, you will know where to go without stumbling. You rehearse silence, because silence is safer than begging, and yet part of you dreams of slipping into invisibility by choice. Perhaps one day you will no longer be summoned to feasts or bathhouses, no longer painted or perfumed, no longer required to sparkle. Perhaps one day you will be allowed to fade into the kitchens, your hands rough with flour instead of glittering with bangles. Perhaps that obscurity, humiliating as it sounds, will feel like freedom, because freedom is not always escape. Sometimes it is simply the end of display. You realize too that the masters fear aging more than you do. They smear their faces with powders, dye their hair, pretend vitality long after it has fled. They scorn wrinkles as though time itself were a rebellion. You almost pity them. For you, age brings clarity. For them, it brings panic. If Rome is obsessed with eternity, then every wrinkle is treason. You smile faintly at the thought. Perhaps your greatest rebellion is not fearing what they fear most. One evening, during a convivium, a guest mutters that Rome will last forever. You glance at his trembling hands, his sagging cheeks, the way he leans on his slave to rise, and you think, "Forever looks tired tonight." You say nothing, of course, but you carry the thought with you to your mat, where it warms you more than any blanket. In Egypt, you once believed gods watched everything. In Rome, you realize time watches closer than gods ever did. Time strips perfumes, cracks mosaics, fades frescoes, silences poets. Time even bends emperors, and time, relentless as the Nile's flood, will one day sweep Rome away. But you endure. Not because you are immortal, but because endurance is its own quiet eternity. When you close your eyes now, you no longer dream of feasts or temples. You dream of smaller things, the feel of cool water on your skin, the sound of laughter shared with younger slaves, the memory of a scarf given during Saturnalia. These are the treasures time cannot devalue. These are the jewels no master can pawn. So you continue, not as ornament, not as muse, not even as coin, but as survivor. And survival, in the end, is the only role that matters. The nights grow quieter now, not because Rome itself is quiet. No, the city still thrums with clattering wheels, barking dogs, and drunken voices staggering home from taverns. What grows quieter is inside you, the rush of fear that once tightened your chest, the constant flutter of nerves before every feast, every bath, every banquet. With age and endurance, even chains begin to feel like background noise. You no longer startle when bracelets are clasped too tightly, no longer flinch when nobles shout. Instead, you move slowly, steadily, with the patience of someone who has already outlived illusions. You sense the twilight of your life in Rome, not as a sudden shadow, but as a long, fading dusk. Younger slaves are painted now, perfumed, and displayed where once you shimmered. They remind you of your younger self, eyes wide, steps uncertain, hearts beating too fast. You watch them perform the same smiles you once rehearsed, the same laughter at stale jokes, the same obedience wrapped in perfume. You wish you could tell them that the cage glitters but always remains a cage. Instead, you guide them softly, showing them which guests to avoid, which commands to obey instantly, which silences can be stretched into safety. The city itself is restless. Whispers of emperors murdered, of legions lost, of provinces rioting. You hear them the same way you once heard Egyptian priests muttering over offerings, voices full of fear disguised as certainty. Rome may call itself eternal, but eternity is always cracking at the edges. You've lived long enough to see gods fall, pharaohs crumble, senators tremble. You know the same fate waits for Rome, though it struts like it owns the stars. Your own twilight is gentler. You're no longer paraded to every convivium, no longer required at every bathhouse. Sometimes you're forgotten for hours, left in a corner like a piece of furniture no one bothers to polish. And strangely, that neglect feels like mercy. To be unseen now is not humiliation, but reprieve. For the first time, invisibility tastes almost like freedom. At night, you lie on your pallet and think not of what you endured, but of what you kept hidden. The scarf from Saturnalia still tucked beneath you, frayed but whole. The scraps of songs you hummed silently when laughter was too dangerous. The whispers you hoarded, the secrets you memorized, the jokes you told only to yourself. These are your treasures, your private empire, richer than Rome's marble vaults. Sometimes you dream of Egypt, the Nile glittering under the sun, the scent of lotus drifting across water, the sound of geese honking in the fields. You dream of banquets that smelled of honey and smoke, of temples where incense burned until your eyes watered. You dream of laughter muffled in corners, of slaves giggling after a perfume cone slid sideways. Egypt was a cage too, but it was your first cage, and memory paints it softer than it was. Memory always edits, smoothing sharp edges, softening hard corners. Other times you dream of Rome falling. You see amphitheatres crumbling, mosaics cracking, senators fleeing as weeds claim their marble villas. You imagine tourists centuries later marvelling at the ruins, never knowing the names of the slaves who endured beneath those arches. Perhaps they will imagine emperors, generals, philosophers. They will not imagine you. And yet you will have been there, enduring longer in memory than they can guess. The thought makes you smile as you drift into sleep. There is still laughter in your twilight, though it comes softer now. Once a senator fell asleep mid-speech, drooling on his toga, while younger slaves struggled not to giggle. You let your laugh slip freely, and no one noticed. It was hidden in the general din. Another time, a noblewoman scolded you for moving too slowly, only to trip over her own sandals. You did not help her up. You bowed instead, savouring the silent rebellion. Age grants you these small indulgences. They no longer watch you closely enough to punish them. You notice the hypocrisy of Rome more sharply now. Philosophers still argue about virtue while drowning in wine. Poets still sing of love while treating you as metaphor, not person. Masters still parade their power while trembling at every rumour of rebellion. And yet the hypocrisy no longer burns you. You have learned to see it as comedy, absurd theatre staged for your private amusement. Rome believes itself eternal. You know it is just another actor waiting for the curtain to fall. In quiet moments, you think about freedom, not as escape, but as peace. Freedom is no longer a vision of running barefoot along the Nile, nor of sailing away from Rome's harbours. Freedom is smaller now. It is silence after noise. It is being left alone for hours, forgotten but safe. It is the ability to close your eyes without fearing the next command. It is memory, laughter, endurance. Perhaps freedom is not a place but a state of being, carried quietly until the body fades. And as you fade, you do so with a kind of calm. You're no longer ornament, no longer coin, no longer muse, no longer spectacle. You are simply yourself, a survivor who endured temples and palaces, arenas and bathhouses, feasts and festivals. You endured Egypt's incense and Rome's noise, Pharaoh's priests and Caesar's senators. You endured laughter that wasn't yours, smiles that weren't yours, chains that never belonged to you. And through it all you remained. The end does not frighten you. You imagine it as another festival, quieter than Saturnalia, gentler than a convivium, where the gods, Egyptian, Roman, whoever listens, welcome you with soft laughter. You imagine walking barefoot again, no anklets chiming, no bracelets pinching, no perfume dripping. Just you, unadorned, unseen, finally free. And before that moment comes, you whisper to yourself every night the same truth you've carried since youth. Survival is its own rebellion. You whisper your true name, the one no one in Rome ever spoke, the one only you kept alive. You whisper it like a prayer, like a song, like a final laugh in the face of empire. So the twilight slows, the noise fades, the shadows lengthen. You breathe deeply, calmly, letting your shoulders relax, your eyes close. The world may still roar with gladiators and feasts, but inside you silence grows, and silence is peace. You are still here, you endured, and now, at last, you rest.